Hello and welcome to Finish in 5 on Macbeth. Now this is the first of a series of 5 videos, each of which is going to cover a part of the play. The idea is, of course, that by going through all of these and looking at a key extract, what happens before it, what happens during it, and what happens after it, that you will eventually cover the entire play. So, in terms of what happened before the extract that we're going to look at first. Well, the play opened with 3 witches meeting on a heath. There was some thunder, there was lightning, and they planned their next meeting, which was to be after a battle. And that meeting would also involve Macbeth. Now, the witches were summoned away by their familiar spirits, and those are essentially demons disguised as a toad and a cat, and they chanted together before flying away. In the next scene after that, we then saw Duncan, who's the King of Scotland, and he was hearing a report of a battle that was happening off stage. In the battle, Macbeth and Banquo, who were the 2 Scottish generals, had defeated a series of enemy armies, with Macbeth, it seems, all but single-handedly carving his way through the enemy to defeat one of their leaders in hand-to-hand combat. Duncan, overjoyed, understandably, sent some of his thanes to tell Macbeth he was being rewarded with the title Thane of Cawdor, and that's a promotion. That's a title that had formerly belonged to a traitor. Now, in terms of what happens in the extract that we're about to read, well, in the extract, we meet Macbeth for the very first time in the play. We've heard about him before, but we haven't yet met him. And he's with his best friend and his fellow general, Banquo, and together they meet the witches. Now, when the witches appear, both men are shocked. They hadn't known the witches were there. They had no knowledge of the fact the meeting was going to happen. And Macbeth challenges the witches immediately. The witches greet Macbeth with 3 titles: Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor, and King. Banquo challenges them, and they tell Banquo that his children will be kings, his descendants, but he won't be. Macbeth begs for more information, at which point the witches disappear. Macbeth, Extract 1, that's Act 1, Scene 3, Macbeth meets the witches. Well, so foul and fair a day I have not seen. A half-fast court afore us. What are these, so withered and so wild in their attire, that look not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yet are aught? Live ye? Are ye all that man may question? You seem to understand me by each at once her chappy finger lying upon her skinny lips. You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you're so. Speak if you can. What are you? All hail, Macbeth! Hail to thee, Thane of Glamis! All hail, Macbeth! Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor! All hail, Macbeth, that shalt be king hereafter! Good sir, why do you start and seem to fear things that don't sound so fair? In the name of truth, are you fantastical, or that indeed which outwardly you show? My noble partner you greet with present grace and great prediction of noble having and of royal hope, that he seems rapt withal, and yet to me you speak not. If you can look into the seed of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me, who neither beg nor fear your favours nor your hate. Hail, hail, hail! Lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy, yet much happier. Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. So all hail Macbeth and Banquo. Banquo and Macbeth, all hail. Stay, you imperfect speakers, tell me more. By Sinel's death, I know I'm Thane of Glamis, but how of Cawdor? The Thane of Cawdor lives, a prosperous gentleman, and to be king stands not within the prospect of belief, no more than to be Cawdor. Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence, or why upon this blasted heath you stop our way with such prophetic greeting. Well, speak, I charge you. Right, let's dissect the extract a bit. So this is Macbeth's first appearance. We heard about him from the witches back in Act 1, Scene 1, and that seemed to hint that he was somehow linked to evil. Witches were, after all, viewed essentially as servants of the devil. We also heard about Macbeth's heroism and his violence in the battle, which seemed to offer a rather mixed picture of the character. Now, that sense of a mixture in Macbeth is reflected in his first line, which links back to the witches, again in Act 1, Scene 1. Fair is foul and foul is fair. Now, Banquo first notices the witches, and he notes their strange, kind of otherworldly appearance. They are withered and wild. They are not like the inhabitants of the earth. They have beards, despite being women. Now, in Shakespeare's time, both men and women could be witches, though it's more typically associated with women, and particularly that cliché of the old ugly woman, something that is obviously problematic in terms of our modern understanding and our modern views. Now, Banquo asks the witches to speak. Macbeth goes further, and he attempts to order them to speak if you can. This is, after all, Macbeth, the heroic general, the soldier. He's used to giving orders, and he's used to being obeyed. Now, the three titles the witches give him are important. He's already Thane of Glamis because he inherited that title when his father died. We know that Macbeth's about to be made Thane of Cawdor as well because we as an audience saw it, but Macbeth doesn't yet. And that's going to act as proof that the witches are telling the truth when he does find out. And that will, therefore, make him believe in the third prophecy, that he will be king hereafter. Notice that the witches don't tell him here to do anything about him. There's nothing the witches say that directs him to do anything. It's Macbeth himself, with the assistance of his wife, who will leap to that conclusion that he therefore needs to kill Duncan. Now, Banquo clearly feels a little left out, and he can't see why Macbeth would be disturbed by such a positive-sounding prophecy. I mean, all the things they're saying sound like good things. So Banquo then asks for himself. And there's an important image linked to Banquo here. It's one of growth, looking into the seeds of time, seeing which grain will grow. Now, a key difference between Macbeth and Banquo, remember, is that Banquo has children, and therefore he has a future. His family will continue. Banquo's fertile. He's linked to growth. Macbeth isn't fertile, and he's linked to death. Now, Banquo isn't scared of the witches, and he doesn't want any favours. He has a much more balanced reaction than his partner. The witches are careful to compare the men. Lesser, greater, happy, happier. It's designed, it seems, to deliberately cause problems between the two friends, and we do see that happen as the play goes on. For Banquo, he will get kings. And what that means is that his descendants at some point in the future will be kings, that he will be the father or grandfather or great-grandfather or whatever it may be of future kings. And don't forget that for an original audience, King James I, who's on the throne at the time the play is written and performed, King James I is proof of exactly that, because he believes Banquo to be his ancestor. Now, Macbeth attempts to order the witches to tell him more, and again, we see the contrast between Macbeth's masculine, dominant, assertive power and the much more manipulative, language-driven power of the witches, and later on, of Lady Macbeth. Now, Macbeth knows he's Thane of Glamis. He doesn't know about the Thane of Cawdor thing yet, and he can't see how it would happen. And he certainly can't see how he could become king. Though the fact that he's asking lots of questions suggests that he's very, very interested. Most of all, he can't understand why the witches would tell him any of it. And it's that worm of curiosity that's going to eat away at Macbeth after this particular moment. And notice at the end of this speech, Macbeth attempts, once again, to order them to speak, and instead the witches simply disappear. Okay, so in terms of what happens after this scene, in terms of what comes next. Now, Macbeth and Banquo are understandably rather disconcerted by their experience. They both seem to make light of it, they make a bit of a joke about it, but the Thanes from Duncan then arrive to tell Macbeth that he's being made Thane of Cawdor. Both Macbeth and Banquo are disturbed by that. Macbeth is optimistic. Banquo is dubious as to the motives of the witches. And in a private moment, where only the audience can hear, which we call an aside, Macbeth admits that there are some horrible images in his mind, including the image of murder, and that it's shaking his whole sense of who he is. His reaction is basically not matched up with who he thought he was. Macbeth decides to let things stand as they are. He will let fate take its own course and is not going to act to do anything. And all of the Thanes head off to see the king. Now, just as a final note, if you are looking to revise, there's some really good resources out there available to all of you. There is the recipe book for English literature, which has got loads of things in it. There's writing frames, worked examples, a key reference guide, a quick reference guide. There's protagonist profiles, a quotation bank, there's perfect pairings of quotations. There's a whole load of stuff in there. You have, of course, got your quotation cards, which have some of the key quotations from Macbeth on. You've got your need to know books, which contain all of those things as well, the key quotations and some key information. There's a CGP study guide that you were given earlier in the year. There is, of course, the Twitter feed, which is at net_English_, where there's daily quotations going out. And there is, of course, the YouTube channel on which there are hundreds and hundreds of videos covering every aspect you could possibly want of Macbeth, from quick narrative recaps to key scene profiles, to explanations of key themes, to quotation explosions. There's a whole load of stuff on there, so it's worth going on and having a look. Right, and that's the end of this first video. There's 4 more coming, so do dive into those as well, and I'll see you in the next one.